Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar in our Southeast Climate Adaptation Science Center Spring Science Seminar Series. My name is Carrie Furness, and I'm the program manager here at the Southeast CASC. I'm joined today by Kristen Fontana, a student intern here at the SE CASC, who's going to be providing some support for this webinar. So in this virtual seminar series, we're highlighting Southeast CASC funded projects that support resource management actions across the Southeast. So I'll start by letting you know what to expect from today's webinar. So first, we'll go over some quick meeting logistics. We're going to request some short feedback with a quick poll, and then we'll introduce our speakers for today, who you can see are from North Carolina State University, Dr. Erin Seekamp, and the USGS St. Petersburg Coastal and Marine Science Center, Mr. Jim Flocks. So, and then they'll present for about 45 minutes or so, and that will give us some time for some good Q&A and discussion at the end of our seminar. So, so as you can see on this slide, I'll quickly cover some of the features of Zoom, though many of us are Zoom aficionados, but recognize that people do use different technologies. So I'll just point out a few things. You can see that in the corner is where you where you mute and unmute and start and stop your video. Ask, of course, that you leave those off during the presentation so that we can lessen those distractions for our speakers. Feel free to unmute during the Q&A though and ask questions, and also to ask questions during the presentation via the chat window. You can raise your hand or during the Q&A, or give our presenters some kudos. And then also just point out that we are recording this seminar, and we will be posting it afterwards. We'll give you that link at the end on our Science Series webpage and also on our YouTube channel. So now Kristen's going to launch a short poll just to get a bit of information about who's with us today and help us to know how to continue to get information out about these seminars. So so thank you for filling this out. This helps us know who's with us today, maybe gives Erin and Jim an idea of who the audience is and how they might tailor any comments, and then also how you've learned about this, which helps us know how to get the word out about this. So thank you for reading the Southeast CASC newsletter, and it looks like we've got a representation of both federal, state, and university folks with us today. So so we'll go ahead and end that, and appreciate that you providing that feedback for us, which helps us know how to go forward. So so while we transition to our screen sharing, we'll go ahead and introduce our presenters today. So first up, we have Erin Seekamp, who's a professor and university faculty scholar in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Management at NC State University. And she's also one of the principal investigators at NC State on our Southeast CASC Host Award, which allows us to implement this partnership with USGS as part of the Southeast CASC and our consortium universities. Her research program uses participatory social science methodologies to build climate readiness in coastal communities and to advance climate adaptation planning for cultural resources. James Flocks is a geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, our partner agency here at the SE CASC, and is based at the St. Petersburg Coastal and Marine Science Center as part and is of the Geology of Coastal Margins team there. His research focuses on the geologic framework of coastal environments, sediment transport processes, and providing scientific support for coastal management decisions. So starting with Erin, they'll be discussing, and they are sharing this presentation. So Erin will go first, but they're going to be discussing today some of the research funded by the Southeast CASC that they've collaborated on, as well as some work that USGS is continuing to do in support of manager decision making in this coastal space. So the title of the presentation you can see is Prioritizing and Implementing Research for Adaptation Planning at Gulf Islands National Seashore. So now I'll turn it over to you, Erin. And we are not hearing you, Erin. Erin, you're muted. And
thank you for unmuting me. When I went into presenter mode, I couldn't find the mute button.
All right, and we're not seeing. Yeah, you're not in presenter. There we go. Lovely. Okay. Good to go. Thank you.
Great. So I'm going to be focusing on the prioritizing research and data needs part of this project and today's seminar. And thank you so much for joining us. I just want to make a few acknowledgements first. We had a facilitation team who helped us run some virtual workshops soon after the pandemic set in that were supposed to take place in person. And all of the folks who helped us in that process were critical to the success of the project with fast-paced transitioning. So Kelly Samick and Caitlin Young from NOAA, Courtney Hotchkiss, who's a doctoral student at NC State and also currently a CASC Global Change Fellow, as well as preparation support by Linda York in the Southeast Regional Office of the National Park Service, and Kelly Eirick, who's at Gulf Islands National Seashore during the project period. And thank you, Carrie, for organizing and hosting this webinar. And as you can see, we received funding from USGS and the Southeast CASC to perform this work, as well as the USGS Coastal and Marine Hazards and Research Program. So the project purpose was really to try to identify the types of research and data needs that are necessary to support the proper placement of dredge material in adjacent littoral zones. Most importantly, to protect natural processes, as National Park Service is focused on ensuring natural processes of these island systems, as well as stewarding the natural and cultural resources that are there and protecting infrastructure on those islands. This was in hopes to also provide some baseline data to discourage the disruption of natural lateral sand transport. So what we did was we hosted a series of workshops that were informed by presentations of ongoing and research so that we knew what is known and what gaps exist. And from those gaps, identify those science-based research and data needs to support that proper placement of dredge material, as well as rating the importance and urgency of those needs in hopes to determine priorities. So this happened in 2020. And so first we held a 2-day series with folks from Gulf Islands National Seashore, as well as other regional and programmatic specialists within the Park Service, as well as USGS scientists. And what we were really trying to do there is really focus on Gulf Islands National Seashore, which you'll see abbreviated here as GUIS, and frame it within policy and administrative guidance so that we know the boundaries of the problem, to understand the natural and cultural resource management efforts that have been underway and those priorities as well, learning about recent and pending projects, and identifying and prioritizing those research and data needs. And then we repeated the process again in May with a broader regional group of stakeholders to expand to not just those islands that are managed by Gulf Islands National Seashore, but then to think about how to be more synergistic in being able to meet the research and data needs that exist. And so we would identify needs in workshops and conduct elicitations on the most important and urgent needs, and then use that same process iteratively to make sure that the evaluations that we were collecting were informed by discussion. So 24 folks from the Park Service and USGS participated in the May workshop. So you can see the different programmatic areas or location areas of those individuals. And then in May, we had 57 different participants. And you can see the list of the different agencies and organizations who came to be part of that process itself. So everywhere from county, state to federal agency partners, as well as the Water Institute of the Gulf and a consulting company that was working with updating the Pensacola Pass navigation channel plan. So just a little bit of orientation. So Gulf Islands National Seashore has 2 different districts. One of those districts is in Florida, and it expands the area just to the west of Pensacola and to the east of Fort Walton by Destin, before you get to Destin, where East Pass breaks that up. There used to be a pass at the bar that's no longer there, and then you have the Pensacola Pass that goes around one of the last islands, or between the last 2 islands that are managed in this. These islands support a range of threatened and endangered species, as do their waterways, both marine life, and you can also see aquatic life as well as terrestrial life. And then a variety of cultural resources. The little map at the top that comes from Google Earth pegs all of different cultural resources that are and archaeological sites that are mapped there on Santa Rosa Island. And then looking at the Mississippi district of the island, these islands here have very little infrastructure besides Fort Massachusetts on Ship Island. They provide a lot of safety for the mainland of Mississippi in terms of providing that first buffer for storms. And you can see they are actively being managed due to high erosion and shifting sands. So some of the key questions that were identified in trying to frame the problem in the discussions were, is the system, including the barrier islands, losing sand? Where are erosional hotspots? How is dredging and nourishment affecting the cultural resources and natural resources and infrastructure, and that dredging and nourishment that's adjacent to the islands? And where, if anywhere, is nourishment appropriate? How vulnerable are the islands and resources to climate change? And how is upstream nourishment related to downstream resiliency? And so out of the April workshop series, 6 different themes were identified with 58 specific needs. And so what I'm showing here are those 8 different thematic areas and the number of needs within each of those themes that were developed, and an example of one. So for example, there were 8 cultural resource theme needs that were identified. And for example, section 110 archaeological surveys, particularly at Santa Rosa, Perdido Key, Horn Island, and Cat Island, were deemed as very important and urgent needs as well. So you can see that there were 11 natural resource needs identified, 8 geomorphologic needs that were really general. So you can see that example there, just regional sediment budgets demonstrates how general they were. And then more specifically, there were 22 geomorphological needs, such as modeling, having dynamic models that incorporate changes in all habitats along the migrating barrier island, specifically focusing on the study of sand transport for the Pensacola Pass and downdrift Gulf Islands shoreline. There were 3 mapping needs and 6 different management and policy needs that were identified. Looking at the May workshop, so the regional needs that were identified, these were grouped into 5 themes and 37 needs. So we were able to truncate and get a little bit more specific in identifying those needs and being able to discuss them at the regional level. So 4 different cultural resource needs were identified for natural resource, 10 sediment themed needs were identified, 7 mapping and modeling needs, and 12 management and policy needs. And so again, these ones that I'm listing here are just some examples of needs that were identified. So for example, for natural resources, having inventories and surveys on the barrier islands, including the beach, the near shore, and the back barrier, for habitat mapping and use data for species of management concern and suitability. And then looking at for example, the management and policy theme, one example was inlet management best practices, particularly related to Pensacola Pass Inlet Management Plan that defines the beneficial use of sand that shoals in the inlet to alleviate the beach erosion along the adjacent shorelines while minimizing natural resource impacts as well as cultural resource impacts. So I just want to show you an example of what we were displaying to the participants during the workshop. So when we started with these research presentations, we'd generate a bunch of the themes and the needs within those. And then we would provide the participants a survey link online using Qualtrics. And they would go in and rate the importance and urgency of each of the needs that were identified on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 is least important or least urgent, and 5 being most important or most urgent. And so you can see that there is some spread amongst the responses here. This is an example from the regional workshop in May. And so the 4 different ones related to the transport of sediments really clustered to be the ones that were rated most important and most urgent as well. And so that allowed us to, between the 2 days of each of the workshops per month, so there was 4 total workshops, 2 in each month, we were able to not only collect this information through that elicitation, but present it back to the participants so that they could discuss this and then reevaluate where their priorities lie in terms of importance and urgency following the conclusion of the workshop themselves, of each of the workshop series. So I'm just going to focus on some of the key needs that emerged to the top from the regional workshop. So this would be the May workshop. So these are the 5 most important needs identified. So dynamic modeling of natural and managed sediment transport volumes and directions affecting beaches, habitats, and cultural resources for the region. A need for elevation data and hydrographic surveys, a need to update and validate the previous sediment budget, and also looking at really being comprehensive in management and policy, linking sediment management with cultural and natural resource priorities and recreational opportunities, and having inlet dynamics studies conducted that have dynamic modeling inputs. In terms of the most urgent ones from the regional workshop, some similarities, some of them a little bit different. So looking at updating and validating previous sediment budgets, looking at dynamic modeling of natural and managed sediment transport volumes and directions, looking at barrier island habitat mapping and use data, looking at shoals dynamic, the near shore morphological processes, and inlet studies with dynamic model inputs. So they don't always necessarily get rated the same in terms of importance and urgency. And that's why we were assessing both of those things, so that we could really try to understand both what's important and what's urgent. A couple limitations I just want to point out with the approach that we used. You know, there's unbalanced representation of regional stakeholders and disciplinary foci within those participants and what their areas of knowledge and expertise are, and that could skew those ratings of importance and urgency. But we tried to overcome this by holding multiple workshops with different audiences, by having the presentations of recent studies and data gaps start off each of the series, to do that iterative process of refining needs. So those who are underrepresented, so for example, cultural resources were definitely underrepresented, they could be able to explain why some of the needs that they identified are really important or very urgent as well. And an iterative process also helps us make sure that we're not just assessing each workshop participants once, but multiple times during it to try to overcome those limitations. So some of the key takeaways from this project, really there's a need for a long-term comprehensive sediment budget plan. But that plan needs to be informed by dynamic modeling of natural and managed sediment transport volumes and directions affecting beaches, habitats, and cultural resources. So some of the specific data and research needs to help support that dynamic modeling to inform that sediment budget plan is looking at habitat mapping and use data, section 106 and 110 archaeological surveys, elevation data and hydrographic surveys, inlet studies, shoreline change data, modeling of nearshore morphologic processes, and costs associated with sediment management and monitoring to validate transport assumptions and implement adaptive management to ensure that sediment is within the littoral system. Some general research needs. The project design was one that really kept coming up to the top, that limits the negative impacts, but also understands the benefits to natural communities, particularly species of management concern and suitable habitat. So when sand is being placed on islands, where should it go to limit those negative impacts and enhance the benefits? Cultural resources on the beach, near shore, and back barrier, including the ebb and flood shoals, knowledge about them are fairly limited, particularly when it comes to archaeological resources. And the impact of adjacent dredging and nourishment activities is really important to understand how those activities are going to affect what's occurring at Gulf Islands National Seashore on those barrier islands. And then in the end, one of the key goals was to expand awareness and use of existing data. This project can help to seek collaborative research funding using the report that is forthcoming. It's been in press for a little bit. We're getting closer every day. So that way you can seek funding opportunities and have this information supported by the workshop process. And then to reduce unnecessary duplication of efforts. So that, again, that coordination is really critical when we're thinking about how many different needs there are. And so coordinating that will be more efficient to being able to address the most important and urgent needs first. There's also needs affiliated with data quality. The updated inlet management plans were really discussed a lot about that they need to be based on complete inlet surveys with ebb and flood shoals for each inlet and with 2 or more comparable surveys. So there's just limited information right now that's informing those inlet management plans. And there also needs to be explicit science and policy integration. And so there was a lot of conversation about a recent structured decision-making process that had occurred at Dauphin Island in Alabama that was viewed as really successful. And that replicating that kind of a process could enhance transparency of stakeholder values and management decisions at Gulf Islands National Seashore. And also to make some clear recommendations. Another thing that kept being articulated was whether the Park Service should take action or not take action needs to be part of studies to be very clear in what those recommendations are. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'm gonna go ahead and take the slide down so that Jim can start sharing his screen for the next part of the presentation that's gonna focus on some recent and ongoing research that addresses some of the needs that have been identified.
So does anyone have some questions they'd like to pose excuse me, right now to Erin as we make this related to hers? And you will be available in a more general Q&A session at the end as well. So if other things come up, they can be addressed then, but we'll give a minute or two for some questions. So I'll chime in with one while we make this, and something that I hope we can address even at the end is how you identified the partners to get into those regional workshops, and would there be additional work to pull in more partners to cover some of those gaps, and how might that process work?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carrie. So in the initial planning with Jim, myself, and Supi Daliander, who is former USGS, started on this project and transitioned over to the Water Institute of the Gulf, and as well as the superintendent at Gulf Islands at that time was Dan Brown, Kelly Eyrick, who was in charge of the natural resource program at the time, and Linda York. So we all got together and really brainstormed who folks knew were working on these types of issues, what projects people knew about. And I will also say that our NOAA facilitators work in the region, and were able to also identify others in different agencies or organizations, and knew of different projects and had worked on some of these projects as well. So it was really, it was strategic in that we used known entities, people who've been doing work with the Park Service at Gulf Islands, but also expanding it to these other folks who are helping us coordinate these meetings. And the second question is that one of the things that came out of this really is that a gap was that academics weren't included in this, and there's a lot of university researchers conducting work in these areas, and that would be another avenue for expanding that information of who is, or what research is being conducted, what the needs are, and what the priorities among those needs might be.
Great, thanks. It looks like Courtney has a question. I'll let you unmute yourself and ask.
Hey, thanks. This is Courtney Shoup. It was interesting to see your list. It looks like y'all cast a fairly wide net of relevant participants, but I was surprised I didn't see the Corps of Engineers on there, just with their involvement in the sediment and maintaining the passes. Is it just too early in the process? Or
no, we had there were Army Corps of Engineers. There was 3 that were part of it.
I missed it. Okay.
Yeah, no, they were down at the bottom. It said US ACE. So it might not just have been where you were expecting to see the list.
Great, thanks. Well, we'll hold on some questions and come back around to anything for Erin at the end after Jim walks through his presentation. So go ahead and take it away.
Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect. And we can see your slides. Great.
Okay, great. I'm just going to follow up on the research needs that Erin identified from the workshop. I'd like to provide a brief update on USGS research activities and projects associated with Gulf Islands National Seashore, and also to reiterate what Erin said about the findings of that workshop are going to be published in a USGS open file report that's unfortunately mired down in our publishing network, but we're getting there. So let's see. So my presentation will have 2 parts. First, I'll provide an overview of the data collection activities and development of a new digital elevation model. And then I'll follow it up by the actual projects that are associated with Gulf Islands. And I'll try to put it in the context of the needs that were identified in the workshop. As noted by Erin, earlier, the Gulf Islands National Seashore encompasses barrier islands both in Florida and Mississippi, shown by these red boxes. These islands draw millions of people to the sandy beaches and the historic structures, the forts in the parks. But the islands are also separated by very important inlets that contain shipping channels and habitat for marine life. And all of these features are in constant motion, changing size and shape due to storms and sea level rise. Past studies by the USGS have shown that the islands are undergoing thinning and retreat at various rates. So one of the first needs was to update the bathymetry around the Florida barrier island of Santa Rosa. It had not been updated for some time. So in 2019, we had the opportunity to perform a multi-beam bathymetric survey offshore. To expand our area of coverage, we integrated the multi-beam bathymetry collection with a topobathymetric LiDAR survey that was conducted the year before in 2018. The coverage of that LiDAR is shown by the purple polygons in these maps. It went offshore a fair amount, but it didn't go offshore as much as we needed it to. And so we needed to extend coverage offshore about 2 miles and also provide more coverage of the Pensacola Pass Inlet, which is a very important issue nowadays. And so we wanted to expand the coverage to where the red line is shown on these maps. So we designed the multi-beam bathymetry survey around the extent of the LiDAR survey, extending coverage from the extinction point of the LiDAR signal seaward. By doing this, we didn't have to replicate the topobathy LiDAR survey. Allowed us to expand coverage from inlet to inlet along the extent of Santa Rosa Island. This greatly reduced our field time, and it also demonstrates how we can map more efficiently by using multiple types of sensors and multiple platforms. So the red in this map here, the red represents the LiDAR point cloud, and then you can see how we just butted up against it with the multi-beam bathymetry point cloud. So this is the digital elevation model derived from the integrated surveys ranging from +1 meter elevation along the shore face to about 20 meters water depth, about 2 kilometers offshore. This project is in the very preliminary stages, so we haven't conducted any complete analysis of the data, but I'm going to provide a quick tour of some of the features we see in the data. So starting on the east side of the coverage, there's the ebb tide delta extending offshore from East Pass Inlet. We also see these shoal features extending at an oblique angle from the shoreline. These oblique shoals are common, fairly common along the sandy stretches of the northern Gulf Coast. And then also, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but where these arrows are pointing, there's 2 dredge features offshore from past shoreline restoration efforts. Along the central portion of Santa Rosa Island, there's extensive oblique shoals seen by these blue and green patterns offshore. There are various sizes and density in terms of placement. And there's also a persistent nearshore bar along the shoreline, right along here. And on the western end, there's the Pensacola Pass ebb tide delta. And in the center of that, you can see the inlet, which is maintained for shipping through dredging. So now that we have an updated 2019 digital elevation model, we were able to compare it to historical data sets in order to analyze change in elevation. So below the 2019 map, we have an identical footprint of using US NOAA Echo Sounder data from 1981. So these 2 maps encompass a time period of 38 years. And by subtracting the difference between the 2 data sets, we develop a 38-year change map showing areas where the 2019 seafloor is higher or is accreted, shown in green, and where the modern seafloor is lower or has eroded, shown in red. So again, we'll go through these features again so we can see the magnitude of change that has occurred in the 38 years. Starting on the eastern side, we see up to 7 meters of sediment has accumulated at the East Pass ebb tidal delta, and sand is both sequestered in the delta and is migrating around seaward periphery. We also see significant erosion at the shore face. And those dredge features that I mentioned earlier show up with about 4 meters of sand removed for restoration projects since the last bathymetric survey, which in the 1980s. So the dredging had occurred post 1980s, of course. And along the central portion of Santa Rosa Island, we see alternating bands of accretion erosion, these alternating red and green features where the oblique shoals occur. This indicates that the shoals have migrated since 1980s as the sand is transported down the downdrift side of the shoals. There's not a lot of migration, and the overall sediment balance in this area is not really affected by this process because they're not moving out of the area. They're not moving very quickly. So the net balance is equilibrium. And on the west side, again, we see sediment accumulation around the ebb tide pass, ebb tide delta, up to 4 meters of sediment that's both sequestered in the delta and migrating around the distal end of the delta. And we see a continuation of that significant shoreline erosion over the past 38 years. So we conduct these types of studies to monitor changes in rates of erosion and deposition. This example here is from a study we completed in 2019 along the Mississippi part of the Barrier Islands. There's a link shown here that would direct you to the report, the publication of these results. And the graph here shows rates of change in the vertical for various areas of Gulf Islands, such as inlets and island shorelines. And this change is measured over 2 time periods. A long historic time period between 1920 and 2009 is shown in blue, and a shorter, more recent time period between 2009 and 2016 is shown in green. So you can see in these comparisons between the 2 time periods, there's significant difference between rates of change. For example, here at Horn Island Pass, at the long historic time period, 1920 to 2009, shown in blue, there was erosion occurring, but not at a very high rate. But then if you look at the more recent time period, that erosion has increased almost 3-fold. So there's clearly a significant change in sediment processes at this inlet between these 2 time periods. And then if you look at this other inlet, this is Dog Keys Pass, and over the long time period shown in blue, it's been relatively stable, not a lot of change over historical time periods. But then over the last 2009, 2016, sediment has been accumulating in the pass, and it now represents some of the highest sediment deposition in all of Gulf Islands National Seashore. So this graph and this process captures the dynamic nature of the near shore and these inlets, and this type of analysis helps us understand how the islands respond to storms and human interaction, which was one of the key findings of the workshop, was a need to identify this type of change and where it was happening. So I'm going to shift now to a quick overview of some of the research projects associated with Barrier Island management. The USGS is currently collaborating with the Park Service on a project titled Sand Transport Management to Preserve Barrier Island's Coastal Species and Recreation Opportunities. The objective of this project is to measure shoreline and bathymetric change, update sediment budgets for Florida and Mississippi Barrier Islands, provide predictive modeling to forecast potential shoreline change due to storm impact, sea level rise, and man-made alteration scenarios, and an educational outreach component, which is, to us at least, is a unique component to this project. So the project includes an analysis of shoreline change for both the Florida and Mississippi Big Islands. This is a task undertaken by one of our scientists here, Joe Toronto. This example is just shows the shoreline change, shorelines digitized from LiDAR surveys conducted in 2005, 2016, 2020. Here at Pensacola Pass, it's kind of hard to see in this graph, but because they're close together. But by measuring these shorelines and looking at the difference in their position over time, you can develop gain and retreat analysis of the shorelines. These graphs here show horizontal gain and retreat amounts from Pensacola Pass to East Pass. So one of the main goals of the project, and identified it from the workshop, is to develop a sediment budget for Florida segment of the National Seashore, and that's what we're working on now. This is an example from another area, the Chandelier Islands, where we did a similar process, and it represents sediment transport or flux between sources and sinks. This analysis is assisted by using a sediment budget analysis system, which is an ArcGIS tool developed by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers that tracks the residual value, or the balance between the flux and net value change and flux between areas of accretion and erosion, which in this map here is shown by red and green polygons. So what we're doing is looking at sediment moving between these cells, these polygons, the volume of sediment, and we're keeping tabs on a balance of all the sediment coming into the system and out of the system, and it allows us to develop models that show where the sediment is going and what volume of sediment is moving. And this is very important for sediment management plans and to understand how islands are changing to various environmental and human scenarios, human impact scenarios. This analysis at Chandelier Islands is published in a report. There's a link there on the screen for the Chandelier Islands. So the project also includes modeling of total water levels. We'll see if I can get this going. It looks at the historical frequency of overtopping and dune erosion. This example here is from Treasure Island, Florida during Tropical Storm Eta, and it shows a 6-day total water level and coastal change forecast. The modeling at the Gulf Islands will also capture impacts to park infrastructure, such as overwashing of roads, which is a big need for the Park Service staff to get a handle on. Let's see, I guess I gotta stop that. Okay, so at the conclusion of this project, an educational component will be included where USGS and park staff will partner to explain and illustrate barrier island evolution and coastal processes. The objectives of this task are to engage education audiences and the public on barrier island evolution, and explain how climate and human action affect our seashore and ecosystem and habitat, and also provide material for a park website, interpretive programs, and social curriculum. And this will allow park staff to use this in their education outreach. So the other USGS project I'd like to demonstrate is the Gulf Islands, is the Coastal Restoration Evaluation for Management Application Project, which is a mouthful. So we call it CREMA. The objective of the CREMA project is to characterize changes in the physical environment of coastal systems in response to long-term human alterations and climatic patterns and we do that through data collection and analysis. Once we have the data, we develop and apply predictive numerical models to assess coastal evolution due to natural and human-induced drivers. and identify resulting habitat characteristics and evaluate how species usage may change in the future in response to these drivers. And from those responses, we applied structured decision-making and adaptive management. This provides assistance to resource managers that have to answer certain management decisions in these environments. So it's an iterative process of going from data collection and analysis to kind of an adaptive management plan to attack problems that are the responsibility of coastal managers. And the PIs involved in this project have a diverse background of expertise. If you look at the names and the positions shown here in this slide, this is the CREMA website, by the way. There's a link there on the bottom. But we have an oceanographer, geologists, a couple of geographers, biologists, and ecologists. So this allows us to provide a comprehensive assessment of the physical environment, species resiliency, and habitat health. So the purpose of the CREMA project is to characterize changes in the physical environment. Like I said, through data collection, develop predictive models to assess coastal evolution due to natural and human drivers. If you look at this process chart, it shows the iterative process that we employ in the project, this iterative loop of where the results are applied to decision analysis to inform management decisions and help them make actions. This project and the project I just previously showed are completely integrative and complementary. They're working together. A lot of the same people are involved in both projects. And this demonstrates how we can use external projects and USGS projects together to achieve goals that include both scientific research and inform coastal management decisions. And with that, I'm done, and I'll answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Jim. So I am going to, if you would like to stop sharing, I'll pull you both up into the screen so folks can pose questions to either or both of you. And so let me see if I can finesse that myself or ask for help from my, yeah, that's about, okay. So hopefully we're seeing both of our presenters. And yeah, so I'll open the floor to folks who might want to ask questions of either of these. And I have a queue, but I'll allow others to jump in first. So are there folks on the line who, I haven't seen things come in the chat, so feel free to raise your hand or just go ahead and unmute yourself and go ahead and throw out a question if you have one. Okay, well, I'll start with my first one then. So Jim, what is the footprint of that CREMA project? Is that the whole Gulf? What's the area that they're specifically targeting with that project? Is it northern Gulf of Mexico? Is it just those, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida?
Currently, we're focused on Dolphin Island and Gulf Islands National Seashore, and also some work up in the Northeast. I would guess an island, but I'm not going to because I'm not exactly sure. But we're working on a similar national park up in the Northeast, around Massachusetts area.
And so that might be a process, or that could then be extended to other coastal systems. Yeah,
what we're doing is developing a template of actions and processes that we can apply to any Barrier Island system, and with the hopes of expanding it as needed.
Okay, great, thank you. Anyone else chime in with a question in our audience? And I'll jump in again. So this report, this long-awaited report, and we mentioned that, and the calling up some of the findings from your workshop about getting the information out to people. Do you both, and I would take both of your input on this, have recommendations on some of the best ways to disseminate those report findings when it comes out? I know you mentioned this Park Service public engagement effort. I mean, is that a forum? And then, but there also seem to be some other partners who might not be reached in that way. So I guess I just would throw that to both of you all, is how can we get that information out?
I think looking at not just agency research units who fund projects and who conduct research, but also looking at non-agency specific potential partners to fund some of this research. So, there's been a lot of efforts down in the Gulf. There's a lot of money from following the oil spill and other efforts down there. And so trying to make sure that those who have the power to be able to fund this research, that this report gets in those people's hands. To me, that's key. And then to also be able to figure out who are the players within universities and other agencies who were not present at the workshop, and figuring out how to get it to them too.
Okay.
Yeah, and there's multiple opportunities. I sit in on Gulf-wide workshops all the time between state and federal managers, coastal management workshops, and it's a handy tool. The report is a handy tool to have to say, this is what we did in this one area. It can be applied to virtually any area in terms of determining what questions are asked and what research needs there are for specific parks and management districts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, but it's probably going to be a pretty large report. So maybe some distillation of some into fact sheets or some such to make it a little more tractable for folks. Something to think about, perhaps. And,
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We've been asked to put together a article for the USGS Waves newsletter, so that's a start.
Right. Okay. Great. Thanks. So in the chat, there's thanks for today's presentation, which I should have started our question and Q&A with. Thank you both for these really nice presentations. So, and interested in getting some more information about that 1980 to 2019 digital elevation model comparison work, and whether there's a paper report or have those findings been released.
We've just started the analysis. There will be a report at the end of this year
Okay.
with all the results and along with the sediment budget as well, and the shoreline change as well.
Okay, great.
And we're not going to go through the open file process, so hopefully we'll get it out within a year. We're gonna do either an SIR or a journal publication.
Oh, okay. All right. Great. And sort of related to that, so does that sort of give some thinking about how often some of that modeling comparison should be done, given sort of the dynamic nature of some of those nearshore environments? Does this and obviously that increasing change that you showed at the end of that comparison, does that lead to recommendations?
Well, the change maps in my mind should happen frequently, because if you look at a 38-year change, you're encompassing so many storms, so many restorations, that you're not really looking at immediate response. And that's kind of what we need to find out is, what happens after a storm, immediately after a storm, what happens immediately after a dredging event or a restoration event. And we are starting to gear up towards that. we've started a monitoring and adaptive management program that goes in right after restorations and starts to monitor every year, every 2 years, every 5 years out, what's the response of the restoration is to various natural impacts. We're doing that at Breton Island right now.
Okay.
So in terms of the modeling, what they're doing is trying to develop real-time responses. So based on oceanographic and environmental data, buoy data from NOAA buoys and stuff like that, trying to develop websites that just track changes immediately. And so we're starting to see those on the USGS websites. So that has a lot of potential as well.
Okay, great. Well, we're coming up on time, so I will say thank you again to both of you for really great presentations, and we have recorded them so they can make those available to others who registered and couldn't make it. And Kristen, I will ask you to go ahead and share that last slide, and so we'll sort of wrap up just today by just letting you know about our next SE CASC Science Seminar that's coming up at the end of May, on Tuesday, May 24th, forecasting the influence of conservation strategies on landscape connectivity. So this was going to be given by she's a postdoctoral scholar at the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, who was one of our previous Global Change Fellows. So a deep connection to the Southeast CASC. I hope you'll be able to join that. And that short link there, you should be able to go there to get more information about that presentation and also to register. So and then finally, I mentioned that we're going to be recording this and that by registering, we'll go ahead and subscribe you to our mailing list so that you can learn about upcoming webinars and receive our monthly newsletter. You're of course welcome to unsubscribe at any time, but we hope that you don't. And yeah, so I'll just end today by just saying thank you. Thanks to all who joined us. And thanks again, Erin and Jim, for these really great presentations. And because this great work this represents, it's pretty exciting to have been, to see some of the SE CASC support go to such really great research. So we'll end there and hope that everyone has a great rest of your day. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.